Okay, you can have this cheap, fast, or good. Pick one. I'm sure you heard this in business and you understand the trade-offs it means to you. So what KPI can you use to measure all of it and see how you're doing? I'm going to tell you. Let's get to it. Welcome. Another episode of IBF On Demand with your host, Eric Wilson. I'll tell you what, thank you guys for following. Thank you guys for subscribing. If you're on Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, I'm on none of those. Don't follow me there. But you can find me at eric@ibf.org, eric@ibf.org. And you can find me here on YouTube and watch, or wherever you get your podcasts, you can listen to us as well as you're jogging, walking, working, whatever you do. So thank you guys for following us. Thank you guys for being part of this. We do have a sponsor, a very special sponsor, Arkiva, your one-plan S&OP software solution. Happy to have them on board and happy to have you on board today as well. We're going to be talking today about KPIs and really what you need to run your organization with. I mentioned this next guest a few times and said I was going to have him on board. Really talk about that triangle of cost, cash, service, and really what KPIs you need to be looking at. There's dozens and dozens of KPIs out there, and a few are really connected to strategy. Most of them are top down. Today, we're going to talk about the best ones and how to balance it. I got a very, very special guest, wrote the book on this. Bram is passionate about supply chain strategy and advanced analytics. He made his mission to help companies in achieving the next steps in supply chain excellence. Bram is active in operations research and a professor. He did his doctorate on multi-echelon inventory optimization. He founded in 2009 and was the CEO of Solventure. They're a strategy-driven S&OP company that actually does Arkiva's European implementation. Bram is experienced in research, combined with his ability to translate state-of-the-art techniques into practical, applicable concepts, always proves to be strong added value for his clients. Let's welcome Bram. So welcome, Bram.
Hi, Rick.
Hello, how you doing? Welcome back from holiday. I'm excited to have you here, as I've been saying.
Yeah, I think I'm equally excited to be part of this series. It's terrific what you're doing. So thanks for inviting me.
I said I've pretty much used your book out. I can't wait till the next edition comes out next year, beginning next year, because I think I'm going to need one by then, because mine's pretty much going to be wore out by then. I've went through it a few times already. Yeah. So I do have one complaint, though, about your book.
Tell me.
I have my biggest complaint about your book is the supply chain strategies for financial metrics. I don't think you're doing your book justice.
Tell me.
It's so much more than just a supply chain metrics. I want every CEO to read this. I want CFOs to read this. Every executive. I think this is a business metric that you run your company on, not just your supply chain on. So I love the book, but I think you're underselling it. I think it's so much more than just supply chain metrics.
I get where the comment comes from. That's at the same time, the good thing could still be that by putting supply chain in the title, it's currently still addressed to supply chain people. And I really hope it gives tools and stories and concepts for supply chain people to come to a different type of debate with their colleagues in the executive team. And but I have the same thought and also the same hope that this really becomes material for CFOs, CEOs, and that they also understand that where supply chain in the past, they saw it as something more operational, that if they really think supply chain, they need to rethink the way they run their business. That's
that's exactly right. I mean, and I I understand the supply chain side. That's the reason I picked it up first, and I hope a lot of other people pick it up because it is fundamental. It changes your thought process, not only just operationally thinking, but really financially thinking, business thinking. And one of the things we talked about with the maturity model with our S&OP is that really Vanguard, that top level of S&OP, you really have to start thinking holistically, strategy wise. So with that, one of the things you talk about is that it is the right metrics start with strategy. I
Yeah.
love that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain to us exactly what you mean by that strategy driven S&OP?
Yeah. Well, basically, the whole book has, you could say, grown bottom up. And I was surprised quite often that, especially when defining targets for inventory turns and for inventory levels, that companies don't really have a clue how to do that. So how do we define the inventory target for next year? Yeah, what I often see is that, well, we take last year's target and we try to do 5 or 10% better. And I saw companies really struggling with that and also completely ignoring the context of, okay, I saw companies that were still having the same sales as 5 years ago, but who had expanded the product portfolio with 50%. Well, for the same sales, but a much wider product portfolio, automatically you have pressure on inventory. And so out of those bottom up problems and frustrations, I started investigating, and I more took a top down or strategic perspective where I said, well, if depending on the strategy you choose, if you go for lowest price means lowest cost means you try to banish complexity. So you will focus on the fast moving core of the assortment and you will cut off the long tail. That's your model. If that's your model, your inventory turns will be way higher. You will have less inventory versus a customer intimacy player who says, no, I want to deliver a total solution. A total solution will have a wider or broader product portfolio, including some services. Managing a broader portfolio, the forecasting challenge becomes completely different, but also the inventory challenge. So, and if I go for the best product, I really found that, yeah, if you want to have the best product, most probably your product is a little bit more complex than that of the competitors. And also the resulting supply chain is a little bit more complex. Maybe you have more niche suppliers which are further away. You have more product innovation, so different versions of the product coming in and going out. So the strategy is really creating a different level of complexity, and a different level of complexity comes at a different level of cost and a different level of inventory and a different level of investment in fixed assets. And in general, when we make a strategy, we often don't think that through on what will be the impact on the supply chain and on the supply chain metrics, neither from a strategic side, nor from a financial side. And in too many companies, supply chain people are not really at the heart of the strategic debate. And they just get confronted with the result of the strategy discussion, and then they just need to get it implemented. But that's not how it works. Strategy really defines complexity. That's how I came to appreciate it. And complexity really drives an important is an important factor in defining the cost and the inventories, the working capital, and the investment in fixed assets in the supply chain.
That's great explanation there, and to kind of level set the audience here. When we're talking about that triangle, it's really that cost, cash, service type of triangle.
Yeah.
That's really foundational to your book, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. And the kind of that trade-offs. I mean, I've seen so many times you talked about those, metrics, those KPIs are really forced top down, and they're one-dimensional or at most kind of two-dimensional. And they really don't look at that balancing the triangle, and you don't really need to get better at all of them. Great, but you really need to figure out your strategy to drive different parts of the strategy and different parts of the triangle. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. There's two aspects to what you say. Like, first of all, there's a lot of functional KPIs which kind of tear the triangle apart. So in general, many salespeople are driven by service and by the top line. In general, many operations people are driven by cost. And then you have finance who wants to push inventories down because inventory is working capital and working capital is cash. And so by giving different targets to different people, you get tension into the triangle. And it also means that kind of automatically we try to be best in class in each of the dimensions. And that's where it really goes wrong, because if I'm a product leader, I'm never going to be best in class on inventory. Yeah? I need to be good compared to other product leaders. The best in class in inventory, that will be the operational excellence player, or the lowest price, the lowest cost player. He will banish all the complexity, simple products, simple product portfolio, but he will have a lower margin. So I don't need to be the best in class at inventory and margin at the same time. You can wish that, but it's not going to happen. And that's where it really goes wrong. And an example I often give is if you look at Lego, which is the toy with the little bricks, they are officially worst in class in inventory turns. So we did a benchmark with Mattel and Hasbro and you name it. Lego by far, and it's really by far, is the worst in class in inventory. But that's not a problem at all, because they have an operating margin of 30%, 30 plus percent, and they have a gross margin of 70 to 75%. So if out of those little bricks you can create a kind of an advantage in the market, which makes that consumers are desperate to buy the latest collection of Lego brick type of stuff. It's that's when the strategy really works. And okay, I think Lego decided, as far as I know, to have their own manufacturing instead of outsourcing a lot of manufacturing. And apparently, yeah, to be able to assemble all those different series of Lego types, they need quite some inventory. But if it works on the market side, it's perfectly fine. And instead of tearing everything apart, we really need to take a more integrated perspective. That's when the supply chain really adds the right type of value to the business.
Okay, so building this triangle, then, I mean, if we start with the cost, start with the cash. I mean, cash, you're probably looking at, like, say, days of inventory, and different types of things. As far as you mentioned cash flow, looking at that cash flow side of it. At the top of the pyramid for the product and the revenue, the service side of it, what KPI really drives that part of the triangle for you?
Well, if you look at service, I often say in supply chain we have a too narrow focus. So, well, we often focus on time and full delivery performance, and supply chain is much more than on time and full delivery performance. You also need to take a look at how narrow or how broad is the product portfolio, and how good is the performance of my products compared to the performance of competitors. So on the service side, you really need to reflect also what is the chosen strategy. And if I'm a customer intimacy player, then the width of the product portfolio is an important KPI. If I'm a product leader, then the time to market, the speed of innovation, so the amount of new product introductions or the amount of product changes per year is an important KPI. And depending on the KPIs I have over there, also the underlying supply chain will get structurally different.
Okay, so then you have the cost side as well, which is a lot of the cost. So if you took the service and the cost side, you come up with EBITDA. I mean EBIT. You don't
Yep.
do the as far as after taxes. You look at EBIT as your two-dimensional measurement on your service side,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Yep.
And then you have your days of inventory on your cash side, right?
Yes. Well, days of inventory, actually, you have the working capital. So you have
Working capital,
inventory, you
yes.
have payables, and you have receivables. Working capital is cash. Working capital can be measured through the cash conversion cycle. And if you look at working capital, I often say, well, inventory is the favorite guinea pig because receivables and payables is relatively simple. It has to do with payment terms and the speed of payment or the speed of collection. Inventory is certainly the more complex animal, and because finance doesn't really understand it, they think of it as something elastic, right? It seems like at any point in time we can always reduce inventory with 20% or with 30% or with 40%. They don't necessarily connect it to what's the service delivered and what's the impact of the strategy on the inventory. So you certainly need to take a look at the working capital and also the fixed assets. And the fixed assets is on the one hand, so the property, plant, and equipment, the PPE, which is the investment in the production lines, distribution centers, you name it, and the goodwill. So the net property, plant, and equipment and the goodwill are the two components of the fixed assets. And you also need to take a look at that because yeah, maybe I'm a bit high on inventory, but that is because I have strong seasonality and I need to level out the production throughout the year. So capacity and inventories will also be communicating vessels.
Okay. Now the thing I liked next is it said building that triangle. I said because if you're benchmarking yourself, or you really, if you have your strategy, then you have your cost, cash, service, putting those together into one return on capital employed.
Hmm.
I mean, explain that as a concept. I mean, I think it's new to a lot of people watching and listening to this right now, as far as that metric, as far as balancing that triangle based on your strategy. Then,
Yes, so if you look at the triangle and if you connect it to finance, I say service is typically a driver for the net sales for the top line. If you improve your service and you don't have an impact on the top line, yeah, then maybe you are in a very difficult market or you are just overdoing stuff. So in general, service is a driver for the top line. If I combine service and the cost or the top line with the cost, it's about a margin. You could measure it with EBIT or EBITDA or the gross margin. Yeah. Typically, we look at EBIT, and then it's if you look at the triangle, we say, well, I'm not only interested in the top line or growth, I'm also not only interested in margin like EBIT. I'm really interested in, okay, what's the EBIT or the margin you generate over the capital employed? And the simple idea is that you say, well, if I have two companies that generate 100 million of EBIT, the first requires 100 million of capital and the second requires only 50 million of capital, then of course I would rather do the second investment twice. So it's really about, yeah, what's the margin you generate over the invested capital, over the capital employed. And that's in financial terms, that is the return on capital employed, the ROCE. And I always say, you're American, not me. That the Americans say it's the bang for the buck. So if I give you $1, what do you give me as a margin in return? And different strategies lead to different balances. So to take the example of Lego, in general, if I'm a product leader, if I'm focused on more complex products, I will have more capital employed. But if the strategy is executed correctly, I can also get to a higher margin, a premium. Whereas if I'm a low cost player, take for instance a private label player, if I would be in the toy industry and I do private label, typically my margin will be lower. Why? Because with the private label, the retailers try to compete on price. So there's always a pressure on margins. So typically the margins and the EBIT will be lower for a private label player, but that's not a problem because typically they also have less complexity. Yeah? They need to do less innovations. They can try to produce in bigger volumes. So from a ROCE perspective, I say, well, if your EBIT is a bit lower, that's fine as long as you have less capital employed, or vice versa. If you start innovating, you have more complex products, you need more capital employed, That's fine as long as your EBIT is higher. So ROCE balances the triangle, but it also shows what is the chosen strategy. Do I go for small EBIT on a small capital employed, or do I require more capital employed, and can I compensate with the higher EBIT? That's where strategy comes into play.
That's what I loved about this book as well, because it takes that supply chain, the finance, the company, and really puts your metrics on a three-dimensional plane to really balance. And that's what I loved about the book, one of the concepts. And you did a lot of case studies with it, and I think your new book's going to have some case studies in it as well. And it was interesting because those case studies that you did in this book really looked at a before and after we had the last downturn in the economy. Are you looking at anything with the current COVID-19 and the current economics and really how companies are favoring with the return on capital employed, ROCE, or these metrics and balancing the triangle through this type of environment we're going through right now as well?
First of all, in these COVID times, I do recognize dynamics in the triangle, and I include that in lectures, and it will also be in the new version or the update of the book, that when the COVID crisis especially hit Europe, when I was talking to companies, there's two types of companies. Some companies really benefited from the COVID crisis. Retailers, food retailers, saw an increase of 20 to 30% in their demand. If you were in medical, if you were in anything that was related to hand sanitizers, toilet paper, you name it. So there was a big surge in demand for some companies, and for other companies linked to automotive, linked to construction, they really saw a fast decline in their demand, and it really illustrated two different types of behavior. So the companies which were surprised by a surge in demand, they all of a sudden became very top line driven. So they were fighting for every order, and they were really doing crazy costs. And there was almost like a fight for raw materials. People were flying stuff around the world, which you normally would not put on an airplane. So we were very heavily focused on that service side of the triangle there. And things normalize as the market normalizes, and companies which were heavily impacted and had a reduction in sales, there you saw that there was all of a sudden a relentless focus on costs. So squeezing costs, even trying to make the fixed costs variable, trying to reduce inventories to generate cash. And some of that is normal, but still it feels for me like companies are improvising. It's like we are surprised, and it's every time it's like the first time we do it. And I really hope it will make CEOs understand that they need to invest in decent planning processes and in a decent planning organization and in decent planning tools, because while some of these dynamics are uninevitable, certainly in this type of crisis, a lot of it could be done in a much more professional way and in a much faster way and in a much more intelligent way than the way many companies have done it now. That's what I've noticed.
I love that, because it does look like a lot of companies are just making this up as they go. Yeah. And having a good balanced triangle, understanding your triangle, understanding the strategy, and pushing that all the way down to your S&OP process, pushing that all the way down to your supply chain is critical. And that's what, I've seen the companies that work understood what the strategy was and operated off that strategy. And that was what that missing piece is. To that point, every time when I went in and did supply chain transformation or business transformation or digital transformation, I actually bought copies of your book and gave it to the CEO and CFO so they'd understand we're not going to do everything. We have to connect this to a strategy, and you got to tell me what the strategy is. Yeah. And that's what I did. And I invite anybody else to do that's going through a transformation project. Pick up this book so you understand you understand your strategy and how it's connected. One last question: when you come to this triangle, when you're looking at forecasting, and you mentioned planning, kind of that key. I'm a little bit biased. I see forecasting in the middle of this triangle. It really, no matter what your it helps drive strategy. It can help really in any aspect of it. Where do you see, as far as a metric of forecast error and bias, where does it fit in your opinion in this triangle?
Well, in any case, there's two aspects. I see forecast accuracy as a kind of a causal metric. So SCORE uses that principle of a causal metric. So if the performance in forecast accuracy changes, it has an impact basically on the three corners. So improving the forecast accuracy will improve the service, it will reduce the cost, and it will reduce the inventory. And also the other way around. So if my forecast accuracy gets worse, then it will negatively impact service cost and inventory. So in that sense, it's plus. The fact that the forecast is really driving the whole planning process makes it critical. It's crucial. That being said, what I started to appreciate, however, is that the forecasting challenge is really different depending on your strategy. So if I'm a product leader, one of the examples featured in this version of the book, and it will also be featured in the new version of the book, is Barco, and it's really a product leader. And when they launch a new product and the forecast is 100, well, there's one thing which is certain: it's not going to be 100. It's going to be either 10 or it's going to be 1,000. And their biggest question is really, what will be the total volume? It's even not about the mix, because for some of these products, maybe they have 9 variants or they have 15 variants, but the mix is not hugely complex. So you could say it's more about the bias and how do I get the total volume right, and also what techniques are available to come to a good forecast in that type of situation. And you have techniques like the Delphi method, and I think doing market research is also important there, and certainly keeping the CEO from the table, because their previous CEO was like a strong personality, and when somebody raised the idea of selling 200, then he would come in and he say, no, we can do 300, right? So, but okay, that can be very satisfying from a personality perspective, but it's not necessarily the most accurate or the best starting point for your supply chain planning. If you are customer intimacy, one of the customers of ours is Federal Mogul, which in the aftermarket has 100,000 parts, and they try to give a full range or a full coverage towards the automotive aftermarket, 95% coverage. So that's a huge portfolio complexity. How do you forecast such a broad portfolio, right? So it's clear that statistics here are key. And if you are operational excellence, then you really focus on the fast-moving core of the assortment. So you strip complex products, you strip complexity from the product portfolio. Then forecasting should become relatively simple. And even as an operational excellence leader, thinking about how can I stabilize demand, and if I manage in stabilizing demand, well, then those demand driven or pull type of techniques might all of a sudden become beneficial. So forecasting is key and is crucial, but depending on the strategy, I think that the way you come to a good forecast could be drastically different.
I agree. I think forecasting strategy are both the key, helps drive the pyramid. I want to thank you, Bram. You can check out his book. You can wait next year, or I would pick this up now if I was you guys. I mean, I think there's a lot of great material in this.
Never wait. These will become
Never
collector's
wait.
items.
Pick it up now, then get next edition next year as well.
Yeah.
So I've been wanting to have you on. Thank you for coming on board. It's been a great interview. We could definitely talk more. And I'll probably have you on next year when your new book comes out, and we can finish this conversation off then.
Super. Thank you so much, Eric.
All righty. Thank you, Bram.
Bye.
As I said, it was a great interview with Bram. He didn't disappoint. I've been looking forward to having him on board for a while. And I hope you got something out of that. that strategy is key. Forecasting is key. It really helps balance that triangle. But it starts with strategy. You can have the best forecast, but really understanding what you're trying to achieve is important to balance that triangle, especially when it comes to an S&OP. When we're looking at a mature organization with S&OP, IBF goes in and looks at it. One of the things we look at is how balanced are your KPIs? Are you just looking at forecast error and on time and in full? Or are you looking really at those as causal, like Bram said, causal type of metrics that really drive more of a holistic KPIs and metrics? I've told this story a couple times. I was with an organization, did a transformation project that really, they owned multiple companies. They had product proliferation. For them, cash was actually king because they had to buy more companies. Through acquisition, they had to be ready. For them, service, 90% service was okay. Balancing that cash cost service, cash, let's make sure we have it freed up, lower inventories. Service, we're willing to sacrifice a little bit of service. At the same time, as a product leader, they had a depth of items to be able to offer because they own multiple different companies. So that was their strategy. There's another organization I'm with. Guess what? Razor thin margin. They had to make sure they had the service. Over 99% service level was a requirement there. To do that, guess what? They had a little bit extra inventory. Almost like Lego, what Bram talked about. They had some extra inventory to be able to make that service of 99%. I mentioned in the beginning, it's you have trade-offs. You can't always have it all. And what happens is when you really break down that cost cash service, there's going to be a strategy that breaks the tie. You're going to decide if you're an OpEx type of organization, you're a product-driven, service-driven organization, a cash-driven organization, really maximizes your inventory. You're going to decide what strategy best fits your organization and then drive an S&OP to that. Then your product reviews, your demand reviews, your supply reviews, your executive reviews all go back to the same strategy. So one of the keys of S&OP strategy, this is a way to measure that and understand if you're meeting the right KPIs and metrics. S&OP needs to align to how you run your business. You're not running your business off forecast error. You're running your business most time off of EBITDA, cash flow, revenue. Those are what you're running your business off of. Bring those metrics into a good S&OP. I've talked about the S&OP maturity. IBF helps with that. We look at those. Some of the key questions we ask are, what are your strategy? What metrics are you looking at? How are these metrics connected to each of these review meetings and processes? Is strategy understood and measured, cascaded downward? Those are the kind of things you need to be looking at from a mature S&OP process. So metrics need to be aligned to your strategy and S&OP process. Forecast helps with all of those things. I said this was a great topic. I mean, it's important. Pick up Bram's book. Understand exactly what it means to be strategically driven S&OP process, and understand what exactly those metrics, how those tie together, and then how you're impacting those metrics. We come to an end of another IBF On Demand. It's a wonderful podcast we have here. Hope you enjoyed it. Check us out as well. Hopefully I'm going to see you at a virtual event coming up soon. We do have a lot of events coming up. If you haven't checked it out, go to ibf.org, ibf.org. Go to the events tab. Check out everything we have coming up. Just because we're stuck in basements, not going into the office in some places, doesn't mean we're not still providing great content from around the globe to you. So we have a lot of great content still going on. Check it out. If you're viewing this next year, hopefully we're coming to a physical event near you. Same website, ibf.org. Check out the events tab. Check out what events we have coming on, the boot camps, everything we have going on near you in the future. So check those out. Once again, I want to thank Arqiva, your one-plan S&OP software solution. Thank Bram, the European partner for Arqiva, helping with implementations there as well. Please like, share, subscribe. I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to get feedback from you. I continue to get great questions. I'm going to be actually answering one of your questions in the next episode. So keep those coming. Keep listening. Keep watching. And don't forget, wash your hands.